Welcome to Peegs.com. He's Trevor Andershock. I'm Jeff Rabjohns. Indiana has a new basketball coach. Darian DeVries from West Virginia did a phenomenal job at Drake, built that program into a perennial NCAA tournament contender. 49 years old, won 19 games at Virginia this year, a program that only won 9 games last year. And he did that even though his son, Tucker DeVries, their second leading scorer, only played the first 8 games of the year due to a shoulder injury. A very, very highly respected person in the profession. And Indiana has a new basketball coach. Trevor, let's start here. Your first thoughts, first impressions on Indiana landing Darian DeVries.
Yeah, I think it's a really good hire. I mean, obviously, you start off this coaching search, and IU fans want that huge home run pick. Brad Stevens, Scott Drew, Dusty May. Obviously, they were not interested enough to take this position. You go to a secondary, level of coaching options. I think Darren DeVries is one of the top ones that you could get right now. He's, like you said, he built that Drake program. He has a long history at Creighton. He spent 20 years at Creighton, 17 as an assistant coach under Dana Altman, under Greg McDermott. So he understands different systems, different ways to win, and he brings that to the table. And obviously, he hit the ground running at West Virginia in year one. Should have been an NCAA tournament team. They get snubbed by the committee. And now he lands in Bloomington. So overall, I think this is a really good hire for IU.
I think I agree with you. I think some interesting things to look at as far as his record, his track record. I think his time at Creighton's pretty notable. Like you said, he came up under two guys who have had tremendous success, who really know how to win games different ways, who run really good offensive stuff. And Darren DeVries was a big part of that. Um, you look at his record, he's won, he's 169 and 68. He's won 71.3% of his games. That's a monster number. It really is. I don't know if casual fans understand what winning 70% of your games is. And just for not a comparison of people here, okay, but just a note on records. The last Indiana coach to win 70% of his games and coach more than 2 full seasons at Indiana was Bob Knight. Now, it's not comparing the two, but just saying how difficult it is to win 70% or more of your games. And Darian DeVries is at 71 point, what is it, 71.3%. I think
And
another thing that,
and to add a little bit to that, I mean, like we said, West Virginia was not a winning program when he took it over. Drake was not in a great position. Nico Medved had just went 500 the year before. So it wasn't like those programs were rolling, and he continued it to get to that 71% either.
right, right. In his 6 years at Drake, he led the Bulldogs to 3 NCAA tournament appearances over a 4 year span. Prior to that, from 1972 to 2020, Drake had one NCAA tournament appearance. One. So that's clearly one way to evaluate coaches. And we wrote this in a couple of our Peegs.com stories. One of the ways to evaluate coaches is to look at how did they do compared to a program's history or a program's recent performance. And when you way overperform, to me, that's pretty instructive. Darren DeVries did that. The year before he takes over West Virginia, they go 9-23. He comes in 10-game improvement again. Even though Tucker DeVries, his son, gets hurt after 8 games, still a 10-game improvement. You jump up 10 games, that's really significant. I mean, a lot of places you get 5 or 6 wins better, you did a good job, maybe get 5 wins better in year 3. But a 10-win jump in year 1 is something that I also think is pretty interesting to look at. And he had some big wins. Beat number 2 Iowa State, number 3 Gonzaga, number 7 Kansas, number 24 Arizona. Those are really good wins. There were some other games that they played against ranked teams where they were competitive. It wasn't like, one of the issues with Indiana over the last few years, has not just been the losses, but the blowouts, where they're just not competitive.
Yep.
So it's not just 19 wins. It's not just beating number 2 Iowa State, number 3 Gonzaga, number 7 Kansas, number 24 Arizona. Those are the highlights, but it's also the other games where they were very, very competitive. And again, they were competitive even though Tucker DeVries was out after 8 games. We'll get into Tucker a little more here later. We'll get into some recruiting. We'll get into some portal stuff. But let's stay just on Darian DeVries, the coach, for the moment. When you look at some of his analytics, when you look at you studied him, you wrote a really good in-depth piece. What are some of the things stylistically, tactically that you've noticed in studying Darian DeVries?
Well, I think Indiana fans will like his offense from day one. Obviously, like you said, they were kind of making changes on the fly there after Tucker went down. But the offense still featured space for one, and then two, the players knew how to play off the ball and each other, despite it being year one for Darren DeVries. They had that understanding of spacing, cutting, filling when the ball moves. When somebody drives, they're getting out of his way, finding the open gap to either get a shot for himself or open up that driving lane. And we just have not seen that from Indiana for a long time. So I think the offensive spacing, the offensive movement, just the overall basketball IQ of Darren DeVries' teams, I think that will stick out from day one. And then you look on the other side, the defensive end, his teams have really improved over the years, gotten a lot better this year. Number 7 in adjusted defensive efficiency on BartTorvik.com. That's the elite number in year one. They did it through kind of a combination of one, getting turnovers. That's always huge for a good defense. They blocked some shots, not a super, elite team protecting the rim, but they made it tough on opponents. And then 3, they did not help off their man, especially strong side. I mean, they made you work one on one to get a shot on the ball side, the strong side. So they weren't coming over and helping, putting 2 on the ball just for the fun of it. They made you work, made you hit tough shots. If you made them, you made them, but they made you, hit contested shots, nothing easy by, being in help constantly, like we have seen IU for really the past 8 years under Archie Miller and Mike Woodson. So I think those 2 changes will be a breath of fresh air for Indiana fans.
Yeah, I think two things you said will really bring joy to IU fans. Spacing on offense to get threes and not over helping.
Yeah.
You know, over helping. I don't know how many times I've typed that and it's been discussed on the board. But for 8 years, there's been times you just look at sequences, games, stretches of games, and just constantly ask, why are they over helping so much? So I think Indiana fans will be thrilled to hear you explain that that's not what Darren DeVries does. Um,
Yeah.
let's transition a little bit to personnel. One of the things that Scott Dolson, by the way, I just want to throw this in there aside. I texted with Scott Dolson tonight. And to say Indiana is excited is, to put it mildly, they're very, very excited. They feel they have a young coach. He's 49. You could easily see 15 years here if it works, maybe more. I mean, 15 years would put him at 64. You could go, beyond that. But you easily have somebody who can give you a decade and a half, maybe more. So I think that's certainly very, very helpful because if it works, Indiana has program stability. And that's one thing that I think Indiana needs. You look at the programs that do well over time, the vast majority of them are not churning through coaches. And this is going to be Indiana's 4th coach in a 10-year span when you go back to the last year of Tom Crean, the 4 years of Archie Miller, the 4 years of Mike Woodson. Now you have Darren DeVries coming in. So 4 and 10, too many, too many. It's really hard to have any kind of sustained success like that. And obviously, Archie and Woodson just didn't get it done. Archie had 0 NCAA tournaments. Maybe would have gone COVID year, but didn't happen. Archie or Woodson goes 2 years, first 2 years, Trace Jackson Davis. Then the last 2 years, they don't even make the NCAA tournament. So there's just been too much churning the program. So if Darren DeVries works as everybody that I've talked to, I think most everybody you've talked to expects it to, there's a chance for Indiana to finally have some program stability, which would be really helpful. They had it for a hot minute under Crean. He got 9 years, but there was it was 9 years of a roller coaster. So I think the chance to have program stability is important.
And this is slightly different than what you're talking about, but you'll have roster stability as well, where DeVries has done a good job of mixing high school players, transfers, and junior college players. He really did a great job at Drake recruiting junior college players, and most of those guys were actually from Northwest Indiana. You had the Murphy twins and DJ Wilkins, Tank Hemphill. Those guys all went from the region to JUCO to Drake and helped turn that Drake program into a winner. So I think you'll see him combined transfer portal recruiting, high school recruiting, maybe a JUCO here and there, to really build, a team year after year after year where you're not totally resetting your roster each and every offseason.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because one thing that Scott Dolson did want was somebody who could function in the portal, but IU doesn't want to be portal dependent, meaning your
Yeah.
entire year, every year depends upon what you do in the portal each spring. Nothing wrong with adding portal players or anything, but when you become 100% dependent on the portal, it can get really dicey. You can hit on 4 or 5 guys, and boom, you got a nice roster. You miss on 4 or 5 of your top targets, and you end up just taking guys who are looking at the biggest NIL payday, and it can get dicey, and it can get dicey pretty fast. And I think we saw a little bit of that with IU this year. There were some guys that they really wanted in the portal. Ben Humrick House, Nellie Davis. Gone through the list many times, and you get 2 of your top targets, your roster is different. You miss on 2 or 3 of your top guys, and then all of a sudden you have to start going down the list, and it just gets dicey. I think
Yeah.
what you said is really good stuff. And obviously, let's talk personnel for a minute. Obviously, some guys were there at West Virginia aren't coming to Indiana. At least one guy we know is Tucker DeVries, his son, outstanding player. His numbers were terrific. 14.9 points per game, made 3.3 threes per game while shooting 47% from three. That's a terrific make rate, and that's a terrific volume. You get somebody out there getting you more threes per game. That is a dangerous offensive weapon. And I think it's also worth noting, even though Javon Small, I believe, is out of eligibility, that's at least what the math looks like. He was a guy, an Indiana native, who they got out of the portal. Javon Small comes in, leads them in scoring 18.6 points, shot 35.3% from 3-point range. Obviously, we saw him in person down there at the Bahamas, and Javon was Javon. He's a fantastic player, but that's an example of somebody who Darian DeVries has done a good job of identifying and landing. Amari Hansberry from Illinois, 6'8" forward, was the third leading scorer and second leading rebounder, or leading rebounder, excuse me. So those are the kind of guys that he's shown the ability to go get in the portal, and I think those are the kind of guys that, like you talked about, can give you roster stability and can be very, very productive. I want your thoughts on that in general and sort of some of those guys. Let's start with Tucker DeVries. I think that's a tremendous player to start with as far as guy you're bringing in. Your thoughts on Tucker?
Yeah, he totally changes the program from day one. Two-time Missouri Valley Player of the Year while he was at Drake sophomore, junior year. He'll be that all-level league guy, like you said. Just a fantastic three-point shooter. Putting him on the floor immediately makes your offense better by the spacing and his shot making. Yeah, those two things to any offense, and it's going to make you look a lot better. You get that from day one, it's going to help Darren, get things going right away. Have very little, time or have need the time to get things going at IU. So he'll help from day one. I think the getting Javon Small out of the portal to West Virginia in your first offseason at West Virginia really said something. I mean, he was one of the most highly regarded transfers in the portal last year. You don't have any history at the high major level as a head coach, and you're still able to get him over to Morgantown. I think that says a lot about his recruiting chops, his ability to, one, identify guys that can play at that level. Obviously, he played at Oklahoma State the year before, but then fit into a system and even take a bigger step forward. So I think those two really kind of set the tone for what Darren DeVries can do at IU. Obviously, he recruited Jonathan Powell out of high school, had a really good year for West Virginia. He entered the portal. So we'll see if that means he wants to split from Darren or what's going to happen there. But it's kind of it shows you what we were talking about before, the ability to take a high school kid, have him impact your team from day one, bring in Tucker and Javon with you from the transfer portal, basically, and really succeed right away at West Virginia.
Yeah, I think those are really, really important examples and notable examples of the kind of players that he can get. Um, and looking at like his numbers and the players he's gotten, I just like to kind of circle back a little bit, you know, but really like what he runs and how he uses what he's got.
Yeah.
It's kind of cliche to say, do you maximize your roster? But I think it is something that's important. And talking to some people who are around his Drake teams, they felt like he really maximized his roster. Some people at West Virginia uh, talked to our buddy Mike out there who does a great job covering West Virginia for 24/7 Sports. And shout out to Mike for all of his help with everything over the last 48 hours. But that was another thing he pointed out. He said, you look at, okay, what do you have? Are you maximizing it or not? And I think Darian DeVries has a track record of maximizing what he's got.
Yeah, like I said before, at Drake, he had a bunch of JUCO guys from Northwest Indiana who were really better at getting to the rim, playing in transition. They'll take a three here or there. So they were not attempting a ton of threes when that Northwest Indiana crew was their core. And then they steadily took more and more three-pointers as he got a different roster. I really liked just watching some of his games here at West Virginia. The balance between being a disciplined team, they aren't taking crazy shots, and they're playing in an overall team system, but yet they're still letting guys create and kind of do their own thing. It was a good combination of both, where it's not just a structured offense and it's not just guys going one on one and creating their own shot. I thought the balance was really high, and I think that will be a really good selling point to high level guards going forward, where you get a structured system, but then you get the opportunity to do something on your own and create on your own, as long as you can make good decisions. Obviously, they had that in Javon Small. So I'd like that kind of balance of offensive style, offensive scheme, of not just being super rigid with offensive sets and then not just kind of rolling the ball out there and letting them go.
Another thing that I think stands out, and this kind of goes back to when we got a chance to watch him in person down in the Bahamas, I think his guys really play hard, like every
Yeah.
possession. They're out there competing. And, not every team does that. Not every player does that. I think that's something that's, the word culture is way overused, but that's something that's, is it a staple of who you are as a coach? Is it a staple of how your teams play? And that game when they beat Gonzaga down there, I thought yeah, a number of guys played well. Javon was fantastic. Tucker was really good, but I thought one of the big things was they just played really, really, really freaking hard. I mean,
Yeah.
they are challenging you defensively. It's not that fake hustle stuff where okay, you're diving on the floor when you should be diving on the floor. Real hustle is fighting to get into proper defensive position all the time. That's a real hustle. That's real competitiveness. And I thought they had that. I thought that was something that kind of jumped out. Another thing was, that's the start of the season. I think they had a game before, but that's Thanksgiving week, and they were ready to play from the get go. That tells me that a coach has a really good understanding of what he's putting in during the summer, during the fall, to get his guys ready to compete from the jump. They beat two ranked teams down there, Gonzaga and Arizona. Played incredibly well, and they actually played really well against Louisville in the other
Overtime
game.
game.
Yeah, overtime game. Fantastic. I remember you and I sitting there courtside watching that, going, "Man, this West Virginia team's pretty good." And nobody was really sure what to make of them. New coach, bunch of new players, but I thought it was telling that his guys were ready to go from the jump, and I think that's a good sign for a new coach. Obviously, the long term's the most important thing, but certainly it's Indiana fans are hungry, to say the least. Starving might be more accurate,
Right.
and they want to see somebody come in and play some good ball, and they don't want to have to freaking wait till year 2 or 3 to see it. And I think with Darren DeVries, you're going to see good ball from the jump come November of 2025.
Yeah, and going back a little bit on how hard they play, one I think great example of that is Drake being a great defensive rebounding team while he was there. I think that kind of shows you the effort and the toughness that his teams play with. This year at West Virginia, they had a little bit of a drop off, but constantly year in year out at Drake, they had great defensive rebounding teams, and that is all effort and all toughness. So I think going forward, that will become another staple of a Darren DeVries team is that great defensive rebounding. Don't allow teams to get multiple shots, and obviously that helps your defense a ton if you're closing off the offensive glass to opponents.
And last point for me, I'll let you follow up with whatever you want to finish with, but I think it's also going to be interesting. Indiana has a very robust NIL situation. They have a plan to, do everything they can to absolutely maximize, if not go a little above industry standard, however it's going to be, however revenue sharing is going to work when all this stuff gets settled. But there's going to be money available. They're going to be able to shop in whatever stores, in whatever talent stores Darian DeVries wants to shop in. Indiana is going to have the money for him to go shopping in those stores. I think that's good because as you and I both know, you got to have the money to shop in certain stores. But here's the thing that's interesting. I got several texts from people in the recruiting world, um, just like even early today when I put up that first story saying, smoke's starting to get thick with DeVries in Indiana. Several people were like, that would be a great hire. And I was like, okay, why? Tell me, give me some whys. And some people talked about coaching tactics, philosophy, that kind of stuff. Some other people just talked about how genuine he is in working to build relationships. He's not just going to show up, talk to you for a little bit, then ignore you for a month and show up again with all three assistants. A number of people said he is a genuine guy who really works to build relationships. He's going to spend time talking to people. He's going to bring people to practices. He's going to go out on the road and meet with people. So I think that's another thing that's really going to help him in recruiting. Um, because the state of Indiana on a pretty regular basis has players you would want. Certainly several throughout the state right now. We don't have to get into names right now because it's not even day one. But I think that when you hear things like somebody really willing to put in the time to work to build relationships, that's a good sign because that's one of the things that has been at best a question mark for Indiana for a while. And if the Indiana coach is going to work, the Indiana coach is going to have to have it. If the Indiana coach is going to work, the Indiana coach is going to have a chance to get the best kids from the state of Indiana.
Yeah. And I think that's something he's proven throughout his time at Creighton, going back to his assistant days and then at Drake and now West Virginia. He put in that time, he put in that work, especially on the recruiting trail. He was a guy that you always saw out, always put in long hours during AAU events and things like that. So it seems like he has a good balance of being super hardworking, modest, but then confident as well, knowing that he can get it done. He knows what works and what will fit him best. I don't think he'll, go out and spend that money just by buying the best players available. He will want them to fit into his system and fit in together. We talked about it throughout the year. IU had a lot of talent, but the pieces really did not fit together, and especially how they were used. So you have to have that roster construction of having all the pieces fit together. And even in year one at West Virginia, I thought he did a really good job of that.
Yeah, I agree. There's been times recent IU teams it was individual talent was kind of there, but it was a little bit of the land of misfit toys. Like they don't really not a lot fits together. So I think that's something that's going to be really helpful for Darren DeVries. I think Scott Dolson and company did a really good job. I think they looked at the lay of the land, what was gettable, what institutionally would fit, what um, didn't get too caught up into just name. And you and I've been around long enough. There's lots of people who have come from this place or that place, or and when they first were hired, they weren't a big name. They did a really good job. And I think Darren DeVries, not discounting West Virginia or anything, but I think he has a chance to be a really good Indiana basketball coach.
Yeah, and going back to the comments Scott Dolson released to Pete Thamel, a week ago or so, looking for that next Kurt Signetti to be in the IU family. Kind of ironic that he gets a West Virginia guy to come to Indiana, just like Kurt Signetti grew up being a West Virginia guy with his dad coaching there. So very strong ties to West Virginia now at the IU athletic department.
No doubt. No doubt. Well, that'll wrap it up for this immediate reaction podcast from us here at Peegs.com. Make sure to check out Trevor's in-depth profile of Darren DeVries. It's outstanding. It's got a lot of detail, I think, that's really, really instructive as far as who Darren DeVries is. And he gets introduced Wednesday, 11:30. We'll all be there to cover it. But for now, for Trevor Andershock, I'm Jeff Rabjohns from Peegs.com.